how does one of those brands go about evaluating the different broker networks? And then obviously there's probably a cost involved as well with the broker networks. How did they go about figuring out a budget, especially as a newer brand? You may not have, $200,000 to just throw into broker networks, investing. You're already trying to figure out laying the infrastructure to be successful in the first place. How do you figure out economically what makes sense and the true value of weighing the investment in the broker networks and then growing through the broker network?
Well, we have relationships, deep relationships with many of the broker networks. And so each one of them work a little differently. Some of them have a monthly fee that is pretty nominal, because in actuality, where they really make their money, if you want to call it that, is in the franchise fee. So that franchise fee is that first check that the franchisee writes to the franchisor when they become a franchise. And with that, it's usually in the range of $30,000 to $50,000. And most of the brokers will take a minimum amount, let's say a minimum of $20,000 or $25,000, or 50% of the franchise fee. So when we're helping the franchisor develop their FDD and all of their fee structures, we have those conversations up front so that we build those costs into that franchise fee, so they're not surprised about when the broker networks say, we want 50% of that franchise fee, or we want a minimum. So it really does depend. The others, you can also look at contracts that are quarterly, 6 months, a year. So it gives a lot of flexibility instead of, having to commit for a long period of time. The other thing is, and this is really, really important, and that is the franchisor has to consider those brokers as if they are their extended sales team. It's not like you just join a broker network and poof, 10 franchisees are going to be sold. You got to market to those brokers. You've got to be in the radar, and on their radar, I should say. They've got sometimes 300-400 brands in their portfolio. And so how do you rise above? Be special, overly communicate. I'll give you an example. If you're a printing company, send everybody a t-shirt with your logo on it, right?
Yeah.
Right. It just makes common sense, right? If you're a coffee company, send everybody a bag of coffee. So keep those relationships with the brokers going, build them and keep them going, because they are your arms and legs out there when they're interacting with someone who wants to buy a franchise.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. And there's one somewhat newer emerging brand, and they actually send out like goodie bags, if you will, to like all the different brokers, and they're growing like 10x compared to some of these other brands. And it's really just, as you alluded to, building these broker relationships. And as you're kind of also alluding to, you may make this investment into the broker networks, but each broker, for the most part, is like their own LLC, their own business. So you need to build individual relationships on top of being in those broker networks. What are some of those best practices that you've seen from brands that have had a lot of success using broker networks, building really good individual relationships in those broker networks?
Well, for one of the things that the franchisor should ask for, and most of them do provide it, is ask for an Excel spreadsheet of literally all the brokers' contact information. So whether they have 50 brokers or 300 brokers, you get an Excel spreadsheet with all those contacts. Sort it by state. Find out where you want to localize your start, right? As I mentioned before, if you're in Florida, let's say you're in Orlando and you want to start with Orlando and you want to do Tampa and you want to do Jacksonville. Focus in on those brokers in those areas and start to build those relationships. I'm also a big believer in, yes, start with a Zoom call. That's great. Turn your camera on, please. Don't just do audio, right? That's one thing I tell everybody. The second thing is, if they're local, go visit with them. Go have coffee, go have lunch, that sort of thing. They're busy, you're busy, but you know what? You'll make time for it. And they'll also remember you. We all know this for a fact. When you meet someone face to face, shake their hand, look them in the eye, there's a longer connection, there's a stronger relationship, and you can build from that. When it's on audio or on phone or even on Zoom, it's just not quite the same. And so take that extra step. The other thing is most of those broker networks have conferences. And so whether they're in the summer, whether they're in the fall or spring, typical timeframes, attend those conferences. Go in, set up a booth or set up a table. Many of them have tables. And they have these kind of expos at their meetings where all the brands are there. Go there, talk to the brokers, get a handshake, get a look in the eye, and really be able to have your, as I say, your elevator speech ready, 2-minute drill, so that you can really communicate your benefits of your brand and make that connection.
Those are all very valuable points. I think anyone should rewind the last like 2 or 3 minutes, because as a broker myself, like those are all very, very key points that I think a lot of people should definitely pay attention to. And one thing I'm curious about, you're in these broker networks, there's sometimes hundreds of brokers, sometimes there's a few dozen. Would you say you're kind of talking about geography, kind of targeting brokers that way? Would you say the goal is to, get in the broker networks and literally like get on a call with all 350 brokers, or really kind of be strategic and find like a dozen or so brokers that you want to build like deep relationships with? Is it kind of a numbers game, or do you really want to focus on cultivating deep relationships with like a select few?
Well, you're not going to like my answer, but I'm going to say it's both.
Okay.
Take advantage. Usually they have webinars. Okay, most broker networks have webinars. And you should definitely sign up for one of those webinars, because people come in on a weekly basis, one monthly basis, whenever those are conducted, and they want to learn new information. They want to learn from those brands. So I would definitely raise my hand for those. But to your other point, and I made this point earlier, right? Getting those local relationships is really key. And so being able to build and strengthen those relationships really will be a key to your success in growing locally. So I actually think it's a little bit of both. Get your exposure out there from a larger perspective, but also build your relationships from a closer perspective. And I mean closer as in geographic.